Welcome to BeFM Drama, where we turn great literature into gripping radio. Today we're turning to the works of the American writer Ambrose Bierce, a veteran of many of the most brutal battles of the American Civil War, which remains the deadliest war in U.S. history. Ambrose Bierce is regarded as an early influencer on American realism and a major influence on later writers like Ernest Hemingway. Traumatized by the horror of the war, Bierce's stories are dark, brutal, and dripping with a cruelly humorous sense of irony. Today we're bringing you part 2 of 3 in One of the Missing, a dark story demonstrating Bierce's signature sense of irony and humor. Jerome Searing, a federal Union scout tasked with investigating the enemy positions, was preparing to fire his rifle at retreating enemy soldiers when a random cannonball suddenly destroyed the old building where he was taking shelter. As we rejoin the story in part 2, the unfortunate sniper finds himself in a difficult situation. When Jerome Searing recovered consciousness, he did not at once understand what had occurred. It was indeed some time before he opened his eyes. For a while he believed that he had died and been buried, and he tried to recall some portion of the burial service. He thought that his wife was kneeling upon his grave, adding her weight to that of the earth upon his breast. The two of them, widow and earth, had crushed his coffin. Unless the children should persuade her to go home, he would not much longer be able to breathe. He felt a sense of wrong. I cannot speak to her, he thought. The dead have no voice, and if I open my eyes, I shall get them full of earth. He opened his eyes. A great expanse of blue sky rising from a fringe of the tops of the trees. In the foreground, shutting out some of the trees, a high, dun mound, angular in outline and crossed by an intricate, patternless system of straight lines. The whole an immeasurable distance away. A distance so inconceivably great that it fatigued him, and he closed his eyes. The moment that he did so, he was conscious of an insufferable light. A sound was in his ears like the low, rhythmic thunder of a distant sea breaking in successive waves upon the beach, and out of this noise, seeming a part of it, or possibly coming from beyond it and intermingled with its ceaseless undertones, came the articulate words, "Jerome Searing, you are caught like a rat in a trap. In a trap, trap, trap." Suddenly there fell a great silence, a black darkness, an infinite tranquility, and Jerome Searing, perfectly conscious of his rathood, and well assured of the trap that he was in, remembering all and nowise alarmed, again opened his eyes to reconnoiter, to note the strength of his enemy, to plan his defense. He was caught in a reclining posture, his back firmly supported by a solid beam of wood. Another lay across his breast, but he had been able to shrink a little away from it so that it no longer oppressed him, though it was unmovable. A brace joining it at an angle had wedged him against a pile of boards on his left, fastening his arm to that side. His legs, slightly parted and straight along the ground, were covered upward to the knees with a mass of debris which towered above his narrow field of view. His head was as rigidly fixed as if in a vice. He could move his eyes, his chin, no more. Only his right hand was partly free. "You must help us out of this," he said to it. But he could not get it out from under the heavy timber across his chest, nor move it outward more than 6 inches at the elbow. Searing was not seriously injured, nor did he suffer pain. A smart rap on the head from a flying fragment of the splintered post, incurred simultaneously with a frightfully sudden shock to his nervous system, had momentarily dazed him. His term of unconsciousness, including the period of recovery during which he had had the strange fantasies, had probably not exceeded a few seconds, for the dust of the wreck had not wholly cleared away as he began an intelligent survey of his situation. With his partly free hand, he now tried to get hold of the beam that lay across but not quite against his breast. In no way could he do so. He was unable to depress the shoulder so as to push the elbow beyond the edge of the timber which was nearest his knees. Failing in that, he could not raise the forearm and hand to grasp the beam. The brace that made an angle with it downward and backward prevented him from doing anything in that direction, and between it and his body the space was not half so wide as the length of his forearm. Obviously, he could not get his hand under the beam nor over it. The hand could not, in fact, touch it at all. Having demonstrated his inability, he desisted and began to think whether he could reach any of the debris piled upon his legs. In surveying the mass with a view to determining that point, his attention was arrested by what seemed to be a ring of shining metal immediately in front of his eyes. It appeared to him at first to surround some perfectly black substance, and it was somewhat more than a half-inch in diameter. It suddenly occurred to his mind that the blackness was simply shadow, and that the ring was in fact the muzzle of his rifle, protruding from the pile of debris. He was not long in satisfying himself that this was so, if it was a satisfaction. By closing either eye, he could look a little way along the barrel, to the point where it was hidden by the rubbish that held it. He could see the one side with the corresponding eye, and apparently the same angle as the other with the other eye. Looking with his right eye, the weapon seemed to be directed at a point to the left of his head, and vice versa. He was unable to see the upper surface of the barrel, but could see the undersurface of the stock at a slight angle. The rifle was, in fact, aimed at the exact center of his forehead. In the perception of this circumstance, in the recollection that just previously to the mischance of which this unfortunate situation was the result, he had cocked the rifle and set the trigger so that a touch would fire it, Private Searing was affected with a feeling of uneasiness. But that was as far as possible from fear. He was a brave man, somewhat familiar with the aspect of rifles from that point of view, and of cannon too. And now he recalled, with something like amusement, an incident of his experience at the storming of Missionary Ridge, where, walking up to one of the enemy's embrasures, from which he had seen a heavy gun throw charge after charge of grape shot among the assailants, he had thought for a moment that the piece had been withdrawn. He could see nothing of the opening but a brazen circle. What that was, he had understood just in time to step aside as it pitched another peck of iron down that swarming slope. To face firearms is one of the commonest incidents in a soldier's life. Firearms, too, with malevolent eyes blazing behind them. That is what a soldier is for. Still, Private Searing did not altogether relish the situation and turned away his eyes. After groping aimlessly with his right hand for a time, he made an ineffectual attempt to release his left. Then he tried to disengage his head, the fixity of which was the more annoying from his ignorance of what held it. Next he tried to free his feet, but while exerting the powerful muscles of his legs for that purpose, it occurred to him that a disturbance of the rubbish which held them might fire the rifle. How it could have endured what had already befallen it he could not understand, although memory assisted him with several instances in point. One in particular he recalled, in which in a moment of mental abstraction he had clubbed his rifle and beaten in another gentleman's skull, observing afterward that the weapon which he had been diligently swinging by the muzzle was loaded, capped, and at full cock, knowledge of which circumstance would doubtless have cheered his antagonist to longer endurance. He had always smiled in recalling that blunder of his green and salad days as a soldier, but now he did not smile. He turned his eyes again to the muzzle of the rifle and for a moment fancied that it had moved. It seemed somehow nearer. Again he looked away. The tops of the distant trees beyond the bounds of the plantation interested him. He had not before observed how light and feathery they were, nor how darkly blue the sky was, even among their branches, where they somehow paled it with their green. Above him it appeared almost black. It will be uncomfortably hot here, he thought, as the day advances. I wonder which way I am looking. Judging by such shadows as he could, he decided that his face was due north. He would at least not have the sun in his eyes, and north, well, that was towards his wife and children. Bah, he exclaimed aloud, what have they to do with it? He closed his eyes. As I can't get out, I may as well go to sleep. The rebels are gone, and some of our fellows are sure to stray out here foraging. They'll find me. Jerome Searing tries to sleep, trapped in the rubble of a destroyed plantation building with a cocked rifle pointed squarely at his forehead. What will become of this most unfortunate soldier as he wrestles with this impossible and deadly predicament? Find out tomorrow evening as we bring you the third and final installment in our adaptation of One of the Missing here on BeFM Drama.